Good afternoon. Welcome to the City Council informational meeting. The meeting will start in 60 seconds.
Good afternoon, Sioux Falls. Welcome to the informational meeting for today, the 1st of March, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, 2016. Thanks for all of you being here, and for those who are watching us on Channel 16 and any other way that you can do it now. We have a fairly extensive agenda with 2 items, but let's start out with Tom Greco, our city clerk, one of our 2 city clerks, to give us an update on the municipal and school board election.
Okay, councilors, this afternoon I'll give you a brief update like I did 2 weeks ago. Won't cover everything that I talked about last time, but do want to give you an update on some of the key things that are going on, in large part for you, but also for the citizens out there. So we have this information, the slideshow that I gave to you is posted on SIRE, and there's really a lot of great information in it for people to reference. Okay, so today I'm just going to talk about polling places and ballots, but do want to let you know that workers were 100%. I will say that every few days we may get a call with a cancellation, but we're able to fill those. We have been able to, so I appreciate all the people out there who've stepped up and volunteered to work in our precincts. We are going to be running election school in here, so all the people that work in the precincts will be trained. And again, we'll be filling those cancellations with volunteers that we already have on standby. Also, Election Day, again, a reminder, April 12th is the big day, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. The polls will be open. And I do want to point out that absentee voting begins March 28th, and that'll be at the Minnehaha County Administration Building. Okay, I showed you this last time, and I think I'm just going to pop it up briefly each time. It's just can't urge enough for folks out there to make sure that, number one, they're registered if they plan to vote, but also that their voter registration is correct. And there's some key links in here, some computer links, and a mobile app that people can use to check their, primarily their voter registration address, because that'll become critical once they go to their polling locations. We want to make sure they go to the right place. Speaking of polling places, we do have those finalized. They're confirmed with each one of the 56 locations throughout the city. Again, check your voter registration for accuracy, because if it's not accurate, then you may possibly go to an incorrect polling place, and we don't want to have you dart around the city looking for the right polling place. So please check that. Like I said, there are 56 locations throughout the city. But I do want to point out that as we educate folks more about where these voting locations are, just be aware that your voting location may not be in your particular precinct boundary. So that's just something to be aware of, and not get necessarily concerned if you find that it's outside your precinct boundary. And we've had to do that in some instances where we combine precincts into one polling location based on availability. Another point I have there for your information, and we've been talking to the school about this, is there will be people voting at some of our polling places who live outside the city limits, but of course that's for the Sioux Falls School District only voters. So just want to apprise you of that. There are 3 adjacent precincts that are out there. Okay, the next slide, and in your packet I do have a hidden slide. I didn't present it yet, but it does list out all those precincts by their location and their address, and I would be remiss, I forgot to mention this. On the bottom right up there, you'll see a new feature that you'll find on our city clerk webpage. It's an interactive map put together by our folks in GIS where you could type in your address and it'll take you to your polling location. You could use it on your mobile app. There's a lot of information on the rest of the webpage in this particular application about the council itself, precinct boundaries, so on and so forth. So I encourage people to look at that, but again, on this particular application, make sure that your voter registration address is correct. Okay, so going to this particular slide, this is not what the ballot will look like, but this is sort of a representation of what you'll see on April 12th. As a matter of fact, today we had a drawing by lot for the candidate ballot order. So the names, the order that you see up there are how they will appear on the ballots on April 12th. I did not put the Sioux Falls School District names up there, but there will be candidates listed up there. But for your information, folks will see the Sioux Falls School District, an at-large position, and in many cases, one district position, in some cases, no district positions, and of course, the 6 charter amendments that have been discussed previously. And I'll just leave you with this. I'm not going to brief it, but this is just to apprise you of some of the key dates that are ahead of us. I did add, contrary to what I had in the presentation 2 weeks ago, I did add in italics those key dates if in the event that a secondary or runoff election is needed. Those are the key gates that we'll have to jump through. With that, I'll take any questions you may have.
Any questions for Tom? I want to thank you. This is great. Appreciate the update, and we're all looking forward to an election and a well-run one, which I know we'll have.
Yes, all right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, Mr. Jim David, our Legislative Operations Manager, has some updates on different things happening in Pierre and probably other places. He usually does.
Good afternoon, City Council. As you are probably aware, the House approved the Penny for Infrastructure Bill, House Bill 1116, last week. This bill was amended on the House floor to exclude cities with populations greater than 25,000. The bill now heads to the Senate, which did approve the bill last year. Senate local government will consider the bill Monday, March 7th at 7:45 a.m. Senate Bill 106 continues to sail through the legislature. This bill would impose a sales tax on remote sellers with sales exceeding 100,000 or more than 200 transactions per year. Senate Bill 106 received unanimous support in the House State Affairs yesterday. House Bill 1137 changes the license plate distribution formula by reducing the municipal portion by almost $1.5 million. And redistributing it, 1 million of it to the townships, 430,000 to the counties. Municipalities would retain 840,000 of that. The House approved the bill 49-17. The bill awaits a hearing in Senate taxation. The remaining bill that would have shifted law enforcement costs to municipalities, Senate Bill 84, was tabled in joint appropriations and it had no support. The Sidewalk Pub Bill, House Bill 1092, heads to the governor after receiving unanimous approval in the Senate. This bill removes the food requirement for establishments that wish to provide alcohol on their front sidewalks. One of 2 transportation network company bills failed in the Senate. Senate Bill 156 would have allowed TNCs to operate in South Dakota and provide an exemption to the commercial license plates. The remaining TNC bill, House Bill 1091, awaits a hearing in Senate Commerce. And finally, a bill to close a loophole in state law, House Bill 1108, has been signed by the governor. Under current law, when a governing body approves an assessment for public improvements, the benefiting landowner can block the assessment by collecting 55% of the signatures of the affected property owners. When an involuntary annexation takes place, a municipality is required within 7 years to provide the public infrastructure benefits that are enjoyed by the existing residents, such as sidewalks, sewers, waters, lights, curb, and gutter. To pay for these improvements, municipalities will often assess the annexed properties. If the property owners collect the necessary signatures, or 55%, they avoid the assessment, thus leaving the city legally obligated to complete the infrastructure improvements. House Bill 1108 replaces this practice by instituting an appeals process already in place for zoning. Under the bill, a majority of landowners may file a petition protesting or objecting to the assessment. Once received, the governing body would need to reaffirm the assessment with a 2/3 majority. If the property owners are unsuccessful, they still have the ability to challenge this in court. This law takes effect on July 1st. Some major milestones that are left in the legislative calendar. March 8th is the last day for a bill to pass both houses of the legislature. March 11th is recess, or the legislature recesses, and then March 29th is veto day. And then on a completely different topic, staff has been working with planning to develop some descriptions on buffer yards. Oftentimes when you have zoning items, you're told that this is a buffer yard level A, B, C, D. From discussions with planning, they were able to develop some packets, some information to describe each of these type of buffer yards. I have to give praise to Diane DeCoyer in the planning office. She had developed these descriptions, and so we'll kind of finalize these documents, and then we'll hopefully have them out to you by the next council meeting. So happy to answer any of your questions.
Questions for Jim? Mr. Jameson.
Jim, this is part of just a conversation that I wanted to have with you and as well with the other counselors, maybe, but you could help guide this conversation with House Bill 1116, that third penny. We made that an item of our legislative priorities. We didn't make that.
No, the City Council never included the third penny within their legislative priorities this year or last year.
We didn't. Well, okay, then. Thank you again for guiding us along the
But I should add that a majority of the council did express support, and last year did send communications to the Sioux Falls area legislators when that bill was last put in front of the legislature. So there was support, but it was never in the priorities.
There's the disconnect. I was
Yes.
like, wait a minute. But so one of the an idea has been brought up to have somebody from the City of Sioux Falls go and testify next week, and Councilor Erickson is shaking her head that she would like to go. The issue is at hand, if I could say it and delicately, is that certainly Sioux Falls would be eliminated from the current bill as it's been written and approved. One of the approaches was to show support for those other communities within the state, and that it isn't all about Sioux Falls or Rapid City and other bigger communities. These smaller towns have struggles that they can't get past without doing something like this. And our support given at that testimony, or giving testimony of support next week, I think is important. And it's only with the blessing of this council that I would do that on behalf of the council. But I want to make it clear that it's from the council as a body and not me individually or any one of us individually, and it's only in that way that I would represent the council as a majority. And so I'm kind of throwing that out there, looking for blessings or just stay away.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Karski.
Just wanted to point out that on the Transportation Network Company bills, Senate Bill 156 was not the one that truly I was working with legislator Mark Willitson on. That bill, the one that Willitson has taken through the House, is model legislation. approved in numerous other states, and had great support on that side, and I fully anticipate that one will go through the Senate, but it doesn't hurt to, any encouragement that could be given would be great, so just heads up.
Councilor Urbanbach.
I just wanted to respond to Councilor Jameson. I would support that. You going, sorry, switching back to
No, that's fine.
the third penny. I would support that, but I'm very concerned, and I maybe won't be as delicate as you. We struggle in the legislature. We struggle to get that Sioux Falls label off our back. I would be concerned that if you're going to do it, you be very careful. That this is not about Sioux Falls. This is not something we asked for. It wasn't our legislative priority. It really is about those smaller communities having that ability to do those larger projects that are so expensive for them and so difficult with the tax structure. So I'd be okay with you going, but I just would worry that it's a kiss of death because it's, oh, there's Sioux Falls. They want it. So.
Councilor Jameson, a response, or? Okay. I would, as long as no one else is saying anything on that, I would echo some of Councilor Urbanbach's caution, and perhaps maybe checking with the Municipal League to see if they thought it would be valuable for you to be there. Not that you wouldn't be valuable just being there, but speaking, I mean.
I would tell you that that's exactly where this idea came from.
Okay.
So it has been thought through, and but I can't do it, won't do it without the council's support, and so I need that, and I understand the complexity of it is just, we need to be clear about it, not just me. All right, well, I'll take that in
Erickson,
consideration.
you want to say something?
You know, if you have a burning desire to go, and Yvonne wants you there, then I say by all means go. I don't know that it's necessarily needed. I think that these small towns have representation, and nothing that can't be done via email or phone call to maybe our legislators saying just keep in mind the other communities when you're voting on this, because during some of the conversations, you know, there's talks of, you know, we struggle with fill in the blank. They might need a new bridge. They need a lawnmower. They need, I mean, certain tools in their communities to have, and I would hate for us to be detrimental to another surrounding community. I know the intent is not to be detrimental, but I would just, it makes me a little bit uneasy, I guess, a little bit uncomfortable just by saying just Sioux Falls maybe should just stay out of it for now, and our support by being silent and not being upset with the amendment that was put on excluding us is a big deal that we've stayed silent on that aspect of it. So that's, I mean, if you have a burning desire to go and Yvonne absolutely wants you there, then fine, but it makes me a little uncomfortable for that reason. I do have a question for Councilor Karski, maybe if he's all right, taking Karski, Councilor Karski.
Please go ahead, whether he's listening or not.
Thank you. Do you know if there was any opponents to the Uber bill? I know you said it was model legislation, and there was a companion bill in the Senate as well in the House. I just was curious. I haven't heard the debate, if there's really been any.
On the Senate side or on the House side?
Wherever it's at, if there's been people having issues with that particular bill and what maybe the concerns were. If
Talked to Mark Willitson several times, and he hasn't expressed any that,
yeah.
You know, great opposition. I mean, there's always going to be, hard to get a unanimous vote, but
Absolutely,
yeah. But
no, I was just curious if there's any.
He's pretty sure that most are comfortable with it.
Good.
So.
Good. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. One of the differences, too, with the defeated Senate version or TNC bill was the fact that it would have instituted a license for those TNCs to operate in South Dakota, whereas the House bill or Representative Willison's bill does not include that. It simply is more that allowed the insurance changes, but also the exemption from the commercial license plates. So there is somewhat of a difference between the two.
If I could, yeah, the Senate bill really took away the local control when it came right down to it. So I was happy to see that it went the way it did.
Okay. Anything else, Councilor Jameson?
Just in a quick summary, and to be crystal clear about it, the approach that Yvonne does support was to show our support for those other communities within the state and nothing else. And, you know, I get it, but I guess unless I hear differently from others individually, or if I know we don't vote here, or if somebody's objecting strongly, I'll have to just kind of consider those thoughts and move ahead. But I just want to be crystal clear about our support for those sister communities.
Thank you, Jim. That brings us to council discussion. Any items for council discussion? Councilor Jameson.
Just one, I just came from City Hall a few minutes ago. I had a personal tour of the swamp, as it were. It's the first time in a long time I've been down in the basement of City Hall. Last time I was there, my dad had a parking spot in the basement. We used to run around there as kids, screaming through City Hall. Now I'm screaming in other ways, and it's kind of weird. But anyway, and then I also got a tour of second floor, the new engineering departments, and boy, what a difference it is. Has everybody had a chance to see the swamp? It's certainly in need of repair or change. No doubt, no way around that conversation. But I did have a question, and maybe it'll come later, but it was an enlightening tour for me. It was really good to see that. I don't know how others earned a window or a second floor, but I guess there's always a hierarchy of the way things progress. But nice people over there. There seem to be regular humans. They haven't been morphed into some weird metabot, creatures because of the basement. Engineers in general, anyway. But anyway, the question really was, and I don't know if this is appropriate or not, Sue, but I see you sitting there, and the question really is what's been in my head ever since is what would it cost to remodel that lower level for those individuals? Place them somewhere else for a short period to redo that, maybe make improvements of adding a bathroom or a shower if that's what some of them need and other things. Do you have that number? Have you gotten a number like that?
It has been renovated to the extent that we can. What you saw is the remodeled area. That was done within the last 4 years. So before that, we had more substantial problems down there in terms of water seepage and other issues that have been corrected with some additional drain tile and so on. We did install new carpeting, and we painted, and we did what we could. We updated the lighting to the extent that we could. So we have made that area as basically as good as it can be. I would say what we need to do is move them to a different location. I mean, it'd be great if we had room on second floor to put them up there, but we just don't. We've maximized every square inch up there, even moving walls up, into the lobby area to the extent that we could. So I think the answer is that we move them to a different location to get them better office space.
That's the answer I was looking for. I won't go any further. Thank you.
Okay.
Anything else for open discussion? I will take this time to tell our viewers and the people here, this is going out in the your water bill next month, the end of March, to inform you of where you can vote and to try to get you to vote for both the City of Sioux Falls municipal election and the school board election. So just a heads up, this is a good flyer. Everyone in the City of Sioux Falls should basically get one through their water bill. So please remember to vote. That'll be about on the 28th, the election, the 12th of April, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Polls will be open. Vote early and vote often. Yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I did think of something. I'd like to wish good luck to the university of Augustana's men's and women's basketball teams as they're competing for the Northern Sun Conference Championship this evening. And also to welcome the many fans to our fair city that have graced us with their presence over the last few days.
It was a great game last night. Okay, Mr. Turbeck, are you ready to go? City Administration Building Project, bond financing.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you, Councilor. Tracy Turbeck with the Finance Office. And with me here today is the financing team. Bruce Bonjour, some of you may recall Bruce. He served the city as bond counsel for the Event Center bonds a few years ago. Jessica Cameron and Matthew Schnackenberg are with PFM, and they will be available for your questions, all those folks. And PFM also served the city as financial advisor for the Event Center bond. So the city's had a long-standing relationship with these folks, and we depend on them all pretty extensively, particularly when we're looking at issuing new bonds. Now, last week we were here. We had the entire project team here talking about the office building project, what's in it, what it will cost, and how we intended to pay for it. Of course, the action item that's coming up for the City Council is the approval of the bond ordinance that would put in place then the financing for the project. And so today we want to focus on the bond ordinance itself. Bruce Bonjour will speak here in just a minute, and I'll have him introduce himself and give a little bit of background. But specifically what I've asked Bruce to do was talk through the ordinance and let you folks know what the ordinance will do, what's included in it, kind of some of the legal aspects of that bond ordinance. When Bruce is finished then, Jessica will be addressing the bond sale itself, how that process would work, kind of the timeline that might be involved in selling bonds. And I also asked her to give you kind of a lay of the land in terms of what the municipal bond environment is like today. And then when Jessica's done, I'll wrap it up with a couple comments, and then we'll take your questions at that point. So at this time, then, I'd ask Bruce Bonjour to address you folks. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. I enjoyed the vote early and often comment. I'm from Chicago.
Oh.
I am Bruce Bonjour. Pleasure to be here. I've been here before. Some faces are familiar. I'm with the firm of Perkins Coie, a law firm based in Seattle. My office is in Chicago. Tracy asked me to tell you a little bit about myself. I've been a bond lawyer for 40 years. 30 of them I've been practicing in South Dakota. I started doing bond work here in 1986. So among my clients, including City of Sioux Falls, are the state of South Dakota. I represent the building authority, so I do all the state building financings, the university financings, the state revolving fund, the clean water SRF, the drinking water SRF. I did the tobacco bonds that funded your education trust fund. And I do the VOCAD transactions, so I've financed many of the buildings at Southeast Tech. So I've been in South Dakota doing this work for 30 years, even though my office is based in Chicago. Most importantly, I think for these purposes, in 2012, we undertook an amendment and a restatement of the indenture that authorizes sales tax bonds for the City of Sioux Falls. You had an indenture that had been drafted in 1988, and it had been supplemented 16 separate times in financings. So in 2012, when we did the convention center transaction, we amended and restated that indenture. We modernized it. We changed the flow of funds. We worked to make it so that it was easier to amend in the future to adapt to changes in the market. And most of those amendments are effective now, given the amount of bonds outstanding from 2012. I think we issued about $120 million in 2 series back then. This bond issue, should you approve it, will be the third bond issue, therefore, issued under the amended and restated indenture. The first two were a tax exempt and then a taxable series for the convention center. I believe you have a draft of the ordinance, and I promise not to read it word for word, but let me walk you through it quickly. It's structured in a way that most bond resolutions are
Chair,
these days.
Excuse me, we don't, SIRE is down, by the way, that's why I was just asking the clerk. SIRE is down, there is no handout on SIRE, and there's no handout on our desk.
Okay, so we do not have the information that you're talking about.
Okay, I'll summarize it.
Hey, that would be fantastic. And you will get it to us, I'm sure Tracy will get it to us as quickly as possible.
The bond ordinance will, when you receive it, will be in a traditional form, which, if you've seen them before, the first 3 or 4 pages are full of whereas clauses, and they start with 1988 and bring you to present. In that context, the whereas clause describe your new city administration center, proposed city administration building on 231 North Dakota, and describes it as the project. And the rest of the ordinance proposes to authorize the issuance of bonds pursuant to sales tax bonds to be secured by your second penny tax under the indenture I just described, subject to parameters. It contemplates a project cost of $21,900,000 and would authorize bonds to be issued for that construction cost, plus capitalized interest, a debt service reserve fund, and some cost of issuance. The parameters, therefore, that should you approve the ordinance, that the bonds would be authorized to be issued pursuant to, would have a maturity date no later than 2036, November 15, 2036. It would have a maximum principal amount with the debt service reserve and the construction costs of $25 million, which is intended to be above what you expect to issue. Would authorize the bonds to be issued so long as the overall true interest cost is 5%. Jessica from PFM will describe the market and where she thinks you can issue currently. And it would authorize you to sell the bonds competitively. There would be a notice of sale published and invite underwriters to bid for the bonds, and would authorize city officials to approve the sale to the lowest responsible bidder. The ordinance would also authorize a supplemental indenture, which is something that is done each time you issue bonds. We have a form of that supplemental indenture already provided to staff, and it will be attached as an exhibit to your ordinance. Be happy to take questions either now or after the other presentations are made.
Councilor Erpenbach.
I'd just like to make a correction. Thank you to Tamara, our Assistant City Clerk, this afternoon. The attachments to the item, the first reading on our meeting for tonight, the attachments are there and they are available. Even though SIRE doesn't appear to be working for this meeting, the attachments are there. So if you're, especially for the public, if you're looking for that, it is item 34 on the 7 o'clock meeting this evening if you're looking for those attachments. Thank you.
Good.
I apologize that
No, that's all right.
And then I need to just let people know that we have been alerted by SIRE that we may be going in and out there having some problems. And so we may be cutting in and out. It's nothing we're trying to do. It's the big guys in the sky are playing around with us. So we have nothing, we have no control over it. But we'll do our best to get everything we can there on the TV and on SIRE. Other questions? Councilor Jameson.
Did I hear you right? And I apologize because did I hear you right? Say that the amount to borrow would be 25?
The maximum amount, principal amount of bonds would be 25 to fund 21.9 in project costs. The difference is the debt service reserve, which would be 1 year principal and interest.
Right, I forgot about that.
There's also capitalized interest, cost of issuance are relatively minor compared to the rest.
If I could, one other question.
Yes.
If in a year or two, maybe 3, that there was an intent to pay down the loan because of the sale of certain things, for whatever reason, pay down the debt, is that an option without a problem?
When we sell the bonds, we sell them subject to certain prepayment restrictions. I'm going to look at Jessica here. Are we thinking of a 10-year par call?
That would be the current expectation.
Jessica, why don't you come up so we can get you on the tape, or on SIRE if we can, and tell us your name, et cetera?
Hi, my name is Jessica Cameron. I am with Public Financial Management, Inc. We have been your financial advisor since 2009. So happy to be here again.
Go ahead and speak into the mic.
Typically, the standard is a 10-year par call. That is what we have looked at to date. If we are considering something other than, if there are reasons to consider an alternative call, we can include that at the point that we are selling the bonds and figure out what cost there might be to that, if any.
Right, I think the way I understand it as well is if you do the 10-year, you're going to wind up with a better rate for those individuals who buy it.
It's a trade-off.
It's a trade-off, right, and if you include the fact that they may pay it down, it becomes less attractive.
The other thing to think of when structuring something like this is that one of the parameters will be that we are going to try and achieve substantially level debt service for all of your sales tax bonds. So you fit the debt service for this bond issue in with the remainder. So you've got substantially level debt service for the aggregate of all sales tax bonds, not just this. So when you're talking about paying down bonds, you can think of paying down any of your outstanding bonds. These will not necessarily be your lowest or highest interest cost bonds.
Oh, very good, very good, yep.
Also, if you do not wind up using a call provision such as that, you will have essentially paid for something that you don't use. So there may be other alternate ways to sort of consider using those funds that still take down debt.
Fair enough, very good.
Okay.
Turn it over to Jessica.
Anything else from the counselors? Okay.
Thank you.
Jessica?
Thanks. So just, I think I briefly provided who I am. Public Financial Management, by the way, we are sort of the largest independent financial advisory firm. So the only clients we work for are municipal entities, not-for-profits, those sorts of things. We only ever sit on the side of the table of our clients, never on the investor side. So just sort of to cover where rates are, you know, we've heard a lot of talk over the past, well, there's been rate talk forever, but there's a lot in the news right now about the Fed raising rates and kind of what impacts that's going to have on the market. When the Fed raises rates, that only impacts the short end of the curve. They cannot do anything, and this is the Federal Reserve Board or the Federal Open Market Committee. If you've heard in the news, they did increase their target rate back in January. The only impact this had on interest rates really was on the short end of the curve. They cannot control or impact the long end of the curve. So what we have seen actually is what we refer to as a flattening of the yield curve, meaning short-term rates have bumped up on sort of an average or median basis, but long-term rates have actually remained the same or come down. So just to kind of put this in context, the current one-year Treasury is at 58 basis points, so that's 0.58%. The median on a 20-year basis for that same rate is 2.12%, and the 10-year median, which we've been in a very low interest rate environment on the front end of the curve, is a 0.27%. So we're actually above the 10-year median on the 1-year Treasury note. By contrast, the 30-year Treasury, which is the long bond, the current rate for that is 2.61%. The 20-year median for that is 4.5%, and the 10-year median is 3.85%. So right now on the 30-year Treasury, we're more than 1.2% lower. If you look at tax-exempt rates, so these bonds will be sold or expected to be sold on a tax-exempt basis. Tax-exempt bonds right now are outperforming treasuries, which means that they're selling better compared to treasuries or other taxable bonds than they normally do in the market. Right now, the 10-year interest rate based upon an MMD, which is a market industry scale, is a 1.71%, which is more than 1% less than even the 10-year median. Right now, on a percentile basis, it is lower than the second percentile, which means that the 10-year rate right now for municipal bonds over a 20-year basis has only been this low less than 2% of the time. When you look at a 20-year rate, we are at less than a third percentile. So again, long-term rates are very, very low. Most of the rate pressure at this point in time that we're seeing is on the front end of the curve, which is good for reinvestment of bond proceeds and also good for issuing bonds. Do you have any questions on the market before I sort of head into sale process?
I believe we don't.
Okay.
If we do, we'll catch you later.
That sounds good. So once we decide to move forward with the bond sale, and we've not actually set a target date for that yet, just because various things are being figured out on the project, so we'll want to set that when we get closer to knowing when all of those are nailed down. It's typically a 4 to 6 week process. In that process, we will have documents drafted. We will have either conference calls or meetings with the rating agencies, and so that they can provide a rating, again, on the bonds. Your ratings are in the AA category, which means that they appeal to the broadest range of investors out there. It's a very positive thing from a pricing standpoint. There is currently a draft notice of sale in your packet associated with the ordinance. We will update that. This is the document. This is a competitive bid process, which means that we will put out a disclosure document called a preliminary official statement, as well as the notice of sale, which outlines the terms of the sale, telling them what bid parameters they can use. And then we will set a date and time and take bids at that point in time. And whichever underwriter provides the lowest overall cost will be the winner. Typically, after the sale occurs, we have about 2 weeks before funds are received. So there's about a 2-week process for drafted closing docs, getting sort of everything in order for that closing. Any questions on that?
Any questions, Councilor Erpenbach?
Thank you. Previously, one of the things that we've debated has been the difference between the competitive bid process and sort of that more private process. Can you talk to us again about what's the advantage of going with the competitive bid process over other alternatives?
So a competitive sale process it's considered to be, and I'm going to go back to GFOA standards, so that is the Government Finance Officials Association standards. All things being equal, a competitive sale process is considered to provide the lowest cost of funding for any project. And that is when you look at the factors that impact that decision, whether to go competitive or negotiated, they are things like, is this a known credit in the market? The answer to that is yes. The City of Sioux Falls is well known in the market. Are the bonds rated in the single A category or higher? Yes, you're rated in the double A category. Is the market stable? You know, rates have been kind of bouncing up and down, but overall the market is very stable. There is not a problem selling bonds in the current market. And there is nothing, sometimes it's referred to as a hair on a bond or a story bond, where there's something about that specific bond issue that you're best discussing directly with investors, kind of what makes that bond special. This is, or has a little hair, it, you know, could use a shape. That's not the case for these bonds. These are very straightforward. They are fixed rate, great credit, solid market. All things being equal, a competitive sale should provide you with the lowest price.
And if I might, Mr. Chair, just if you could follow up then, if you could talk about the kinds of investors that you think might be interested in this bond, or is this something that, again, folks in Sioux Falls might be able to invest in this product, or is that, how does that usually work?
So the way this typically works is that they would go through their broker and purchase the bonds on the secondary market. There may be some ability to purchase them on the primary market, but not as much as there would be in a negotiated sale process. That being said, in the current market, investors, retail investors, so the traditional, what we call mom and pops, so those are folks who are buying single bonds in $5,000 denominations, are not the largest purchasers or playing a major part in the current market. There are 2 reasons for that, 3 reasons actually in South Dakota. The first and second reasons apply nationwide. With the loss of the AAA insurers, they all went down in the 2008-2009 timeframe. Most retail investors, because they don't have the time to do the credit work associated with purchasing bonds, would just buy bonds that were insured. We no longer have AAA investors. It's not something that they can just easily say, I'll buy an insured bond. What we've also seen in that time frame is a rise of sort of bond funds. And so these are funds where they manage and purchase bonds, and retail buyers, instead of purchasing specific bonds, I'm going to buy a $5,000 City of Sioux Falls bond maturing in 2018. What they do is they purchase a piece of the fund, and that fund has a bunch of different pieces of bonds in it. And so they're receiving sort of a more normalized credit, and there's not as much credit risk. The other reason why we don't see as much, the other reason why retail investors, don't play as large a part in South Dakota is you don't have an income tax. And so when folks are purchasing bonds, they are looking for tax-exempt bonds. They're looking for the benefits of tax exemption. They receive the federal tax benefit, but they don't receive a state tax benefit. So from a tax perspective, it does not matter to South Dakotans whether they're purchasing a City of Sioux Falls bond or a Chicago bond. Whereas in other states, Minnesota, for example, you receive, we do have income tax in Minnesota, as you've probably heard. When you purchase a Minnesota bond as a Minnesota investor, you receive the benefit of that state tax exemption. I would expect the typical investors for your bonds to be banks, insurance companies, as well as separately managed accounts, trust funds, and then these bond funds that provide sort of the ultimate retail investor distribution.
Great, thank you very much.
Other questions?
All right. If not, I'll turn it back over.
I do have one.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to, say that I think there probably is a little bit of a difference between a Chicago bond and a Sioux Falls bond, but I wouldn't want to put any risk tolerance on that.
There's a huge difference between a Chicago bond and a City of Sioux Falls bond. They just don't have state tax exemption. That's why they came to my head.
I do have one other question, and that is, give us your prediction or your put on your soothsayer hat. Tell us what you think is going to happen to interest rates in this market in the next 6 months.
In the next 6 months, we're not seeing. I think there is some expectation that the Fed will increase rates again this year on the short end. Whether that's in the next 6 months or not, that remains to be seen. As I said, we're not seeing a whole lot of pressure on the long end of the curve, so I think we could see some upward movement just because rates are so low today, but it's not like they're going to return to 20-year medians, I wouldn't expect.
It's like you said, when the 0.25% was added, it really flattened the long term.
Yeah, exactly. Our yield curve went from this to this, or I guess this to this, if I'm...
Okay, so no significant changes, basically, that you see.
We don't see a huge amount of upward pressure in the current market.
Okay. Other questions anyone has? Councilor Jameson?
Maybe not for Jessica, but maybe for Tracy, or was it Bruce? Excuse me, but I was listening, but maybe not writing down everything that was being said. I thought it would be written more clearly. So I'm looking for the amount that we're trying to propose to borrow, term, and those annual rates of payments, what those were. Thought I heard maybe that get laid out, but maybe I was hearing other things. So I'm just looking for a quick summary of how much we're borrowing, for how long, and what those payments would be.
So the current project cost is about $21.9 million. The maximum par, as Bruce said, is $25 million. In the current market, we are experiencing what are referred to as premium bonds, meaning that you issue a lower par amount, pay a higher interest rate than the yield you're actually paying, and the investor pays you more than the par amount of those bonds. So we're typically seeing a premium in the neighborhood of about 15%. So we would expect that you would issue less than the $22 million less than $22 million in actual par, provided there's no change in the market. If you want, I can get into bond math, but you probably don't want that. We are currently looking at a 20-year term on the bonds. That 20-year term is, we could look at shortening that at this point in time, but right now we put a maximum term of 20 years.
Just in the general scheme of things, going with $22 million and 20 years, the debt service would be how much per year?
Do you have it with you? Okay. It's about 1.8 million.
About what?
1.8 million. 1.8.
The debt, the interest paid? No, okay.
No, the debt service. So that is to pay off the full amount that you've borrowed. It would be about 1.8 million
per year.
Per year.
Got it.
We are wrapping debt around some of your existing debt. Additionally, that does not include any refinancing of these bonds in the future. And given where we expect interest rates, where we expect the interest rates, not the yields on these bonds to be, we would expect they could be refinanced.
If you could, again, I know it was said, but the summary of how you are wrapping up those other debt services so that there was an even, I think it was an even,
So we're looking at trying to, it's not entirely a level coverage, but we're trying to get to relatively level coverage. Just, I keep hitting things. I'm gonna put my arms down here. We're trying, you've got some larger payments right now, kind of in the early years, and then some of those bonds are falling off relatively quickly. So we'll amortize, or we'll have slightly lower debt service payments on these new bonds over the first couple of years, and then sort of bring them up to the 1.8 million.
so I think I get it. So what the idea here is to not have a spike in debt service or debt payments, shorten the first ones up so that we don't get freaked out with the other ones all included turns into a high number. This just kind of changes the story, makes it, that's interesting.
Well, it keeps your debt service coverage more level. It also, because you use the second penny for ongoing capital costs and all those sorts of things, it makes sure that you don't damage what you can do on a pay-go basis for a short period of time.
One last away piece from a lot of projects that might need to be done now.
One last piece then. So in projecting in the future, there's likely to be more borrowing to occur for other things. It's always the case. Are you, how are you predicting that? Or how are you using that as a, are you using the past as some kind of predictor of what the future borrowing needs are going to be? Is that how you're leveling it out? We're
looking at sort of what your current debt service is.
So
and
you're not including any other future debt?
No, at this point in time. I mean, we've been looking at, and Tracy can probably speak to this, we've been looking at your capital improvement plan, kind of that 5-year plan, but it's not as if we are layering on a bunch of additional debt. As we go out, your debt begins to sort of trail off over time. You've issued bonds on a fairly regular basis. So as bonds come off, new capacity opens up. And you have existing capacity within your coverage levels now.
Okay, hearing no more questions for Jessica. Tracy, you want to finish up?
Yeah, thank you. And if I can just go back to the last discussion point here that you're talking about in terms of the level of debt service payments. What we're contemplating today is that, as Jessica said, in the first few years to keep the payments at the level that can be accommodated within our capital program without having to take any planned projects out of the plan that you folks approved last fall. So that's part of the strategy is to, we've allowed for within the capital program up to $1 million for example, for 2017 to go toward debt service payments. So that would be approached as kind of a cap for next year. That's how much we would want to pay toward these new bonds in next year so that all the other projects that we've got in our plan can move forward without disruption. And the same thing then for 2018. And then when we get out there to that third year, fourth year, we would allow it to go up to that $1.8 million per year. And that's consistent with the graphic, if you recall, last week showed you kind of how that new bond issue would fit in on top of the existing payments. The other thing that specific item you might want to be aware of is that we do have bonds that we're paying with our second penny revenues that will be retired next year. There are actually some state revolving fund loans that were taken out a number of years ago for some stormwater improvements. And so for the past 10 years or so, second penny revenues have been going to pay those. They will be retired completely then next year by the end of 2017. So that's another part of the rationale of keeping them low until those bonds are paid off, and then instead of paying those dollars toward those bonds, we can roll them to other debt service payments. So with that, as Councilor Erpenbach pointed out, and I failed to mention at the outset, that this bond ordinance is on first reading tonight. The second reading, as we're proposing, would be a week from tonight, along with a public hearing and eventual adoption of that particular ordinance. Now, both Bruce and Jessica, as well as Matt, will be here tonight. Our intention would be to have Bruce walk through the ordinance again, not necessarily so much again for your folks' benefit, as much as I'm sure you'd like to hear it again, but for the public's, if folks haven't heard kind of the explanation of the bond ordinance and what it does. Well, I've asked Bruce to go through that briefly tonight. And then so you'll get another crack if you have other questions that maybe aren't coming to mind right now. Please hit us with those questions tonight. It's not our intention to bring them back again then for second reading, but they are always available if we've got other questions that you would like answered by those folks, so we can certainly follow up outside of any meetings we might have. With that, I guess I would just open it up one more time for any other questions that you folks have.
Before we open up for questions, I need to let you know that they're posting a message on the agenda's webpage regarding the outage of SIRE. Live streaming should be available by clicking Watch New Live Video Now near the top of the agenda webpage, in case anybody is interested in doing that at home. Okay, questions, please. No questions?
Okay, like as I say, if you think of some others between now and
would this be an
tonight.
appropriate time to discuss a little bit more, so we didn't maybe have to go into so much tonight, some questions that we may have regarding the building itself and that kind of thing?
Well,
Sue is here.
If it's the kind of thing that either Sue or I or Aaron can answer, yeah, certainly. I do believe that tonight we'll have, correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, but I believe we'll have representatives from Coke Hazard Architects as well as Henry Carlson Construction Management tonight. So, but yeah, if there are questions you think we might be able to answer, we'd certainly take a stab at it.
No one? I have one. We received some information from our budget analyst who did some analysis, and in the paper and the work that he's done, it appears to me that with the number of people we have working in administrative positions, administrative office situations, that through 2014, I know this is not completely up to date, but it appears to me that, you know, and I just state this bluntly, that it looks like we're going to build a building for 24 people or 25 people of 21 million. Now, I know that doesn't look right, but can you give me some background on that? Because we're looking at a total of, at the end of 2014, about 1,160 people working for the city. That was an increase from 2005 of 96 people. But when I take out the people that would be in this new building, we're looking at the attorney, engineering, park and rec, public work administration, and that amounts to an increase in the number of people over that of about 24 people. There would be, I'm sorry, there would be more people than that in there, but in that time, they've only increased about 24 people in those 9-10 years. Now, and this is, these are the people, the administrative people. Mr. Bixer, am I right on this? And so I'm not having second thoughts, but I need some explanation, I guess, as to why these numbers are the way they are, and if they're not correct, we need to look at them, et cetera.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure what you're looking at in terms of information, but I can certainly provide you with my estimates in terms of the number of FTE in the new building. We're estimating an engineering staff would move over there, as well as some of the Parks and Rec folks, probably about 20 of them, about 64 from engineering. Utility billing would be 11 people. So we're estimating about 95 to 100 people from day one in the new building. We're looking at historical trends and then looking forward in terms of population growth and permit valuations, all of that, and then trying to project out over the next 30 years, which is what we're hoping this building will accommodate, more than 30 years worth of growth. And we have estimated a 22% increase every 15 years in the number of FTE. So over a period of 30 years for the new building, we'd probably go from 100 people to about 160 people, which is approximately what we have in City Hall today, is about 165 FTE. By clearing out a lot of the folks on second floor, moving them over to the new building, we would position ourselves to be able to move the city attorneys as well as the economic development team from community development out of leased space back to City Hall and give us some future growth space in City Hall. So
Community development, they're where?
they're in leased space right now, right across the street, 100 South Dakota Avenue.
Oh, okay, that one, yeah, okay.
So those are the numbers that that we've been looking at. Like I said, we want first and second floor of the new building to be able to accommodate growth for the next 30 plus years. And as you know, we'd have that third floor shell available to us. And the thing is that we want all of the office space to be flexible enough to allow us to move people where it makes the most sense. So none of this is set in stone, but this is what we're thinking today of what we would do in terms of the departments and divisions that would move to the new building versus the ones that would stay in the current City Hall, if that makes sense.
Go ahead, Mr. Jameson.
Not knowing that this was going to shift over to this discussion in detail, I do have a few questions for you.
Okay.
The amount that you paid or we spent on remodeling that lower level of the basement, the swamp, how many years ago was that and how much was it?
Well, it was within the last 5 years because it was within my tenure with the city. I can't tell you off the top of my head, but I can look it up for you to see what the remodel expense was.
Yes, if you could, give me that number. And then the other is you answered some questions that we had asked you to answer, and thank you for that. And you outlined a couple of growth areas that are in the City Hall and somewhere else. One looks like it's set up for human resources, and the other one is for the engineers in the basement. It just looks like you have 4 planned growth spaces in building services,
Right.
1 planned growth space in human resources. Okay.
Correct.
Can you tell me about those growth spaces?
Well, that's what's available in the currently remodeled spaces. So in both of those areas, we did some remodeling last year. And in the HR area, we ended up with 1 additional FTE work area. And then in planning building services, we have 4 for growth. On second floor, we have nothing. We've maxed out. The second floor is in terms of the engineering space. We don't have room for growth there, and we don't have room to add the people in the basement to the second floor.
Okay, and then as well, the health department. What is the space there? What do we have access to? Do we have room for other things there?
So the health department resides right now in a county building. And I guess I can't answer specifically in terms of if they have any additional space, but I would say that they don't. I know that they've looked at the possibility of some conference rooms in the upstairs second floor, potentially even repurposing those because they're not complaining at this point in terms of not having enough space for growth, but I think that they are pretty well maxed out, as is the law enforcement center, which is another reason to consider in terms of building a new building. You really, even though you have, like with the law enforcement center, that building was, I think, constructed in 2004, and they are out of space already. And that was just, 12 years ago. So there are some areas within City Hall now that are conference rooms or other like training rooms and things like that that are being considered to be repurposed because they are out of space. So that's why we continue to emphasize that for the new building, we don't want to get ourselves in that situation. We really need to overbuild it so that we have room to adjust in the future.
Very good, and just wanted to share one other thing, I guess publicly as best I can. I had made phone calls to 2 building owners downtown with the intentions of finding a space that they would be willing to sell, that the City of Sioux Falls could potentially purchase. They could vacate it after they build their new place because they're moving. I'm waiting on those details to come back, but I intend to share them with the entire group. And I know you've done some due diligence, and one of the things we asked about was, at the end of the day, was show us some of your work, show us the work that you did and the due diligence that you've said you've done. You stated a couple answers here that you've talked to a lot of those business building owners or things, and that was really it. The idea that they may be moving out in 10 years or 5 years is the options and things that are, I think, very valuable for us to consider. And for me, I need to get there. I need to get that information in front of me. So if you have any of that extra homework, if you will, or that work that you could show us what those people said when you called them and asked about their buildings. Was it only the properties that were listed for sale? Did you contact buildings that were not for sale? And you knocked on their door and said, hey, would you be ever willing to? During the last week, there was a presentation by the Bender Group, and they outlined that the majority of all the buildings that were sold downtown were done off-market, meaning that individuals came to them and said, look, I'd like to buy your building. Would you be willing to sell it? And that's how most of them were done. I think we need to do that, exercise that opportunity, maybe even to the point where we hire a realtor, professional broker commercial broker who understands the market and look on our behalf and connect with those people. I've got to see your homework, or I've got to do it myself in order to get over that hump. So if you have that, share it with me, and when I get the information back, I will share it with you and the rest of what I've found out. So please, thanks.
Mr. Kiley?
Councilor Rolfe and I have maybe yet another way of, I guess, explaining what the direction city growth is going in, and maybe to answer your question maybe a little differently than what Sue did. In some of the information that we had requested from Sue, she had stated that approximately 26% of our city employees are City Hall type city employees. Administrative employees, thank you. So with the projections of growth that had been provided, that would mean that actually in the next 5 years, we would see city employees grow approximately 108 employees. So 26% of that would be an additional 28. So now we're at close to 125 to 130 individuals in the new building. So we can project that out just to 15 years, and we're getting very close to doubling the number of city employees in the new building. From 95 to 100 to close to 185 or 90 at that particular point based on growth projections. And I would also mention that in that 15-year period of time, we're projecting the city growth population to increase by about 47,000 people. So just another attempt at answering your question.
Go ahead, Councilor Erickson.
Since we're on a roll, I guess we'll just keep going a little bit. My questions are in regards to the utility building, and I know we've talked about at one point selling buildings versus repurposing versus lease versus not leasing and the benefits to those. It's my understanding that we will not be selling the Parks building at this point because it might be repurposed with the Levitt Pavilion being nearby. I understand that it's a pretty cool building. But my question is about the utility building, billing building. What is the intent for that? I know SMG storage was mentioned. And what is it going to cost to get that for them to store? And what do they need to store? Because it's still going to cost to have the building, and we still need to, I mean, I understand we own it.
Yeah, I'm not sure that any final decisions have been made about either of the two buildings you mentioned. I think there are any number of ideas. Certainly repurposing the utility billing office to serve or support the event complex that we have. That's one idea. There have been those over the past couple of years that have looked at that and as perhaps something that the city should sell. So I think at this point, from my perspective, everything is still on the table. I don't think anything is cast in stone. And I think certainly if there are other ideas for how either one of those locations might be used, I think it's a good time to begin to vet those ideas out. There isn't any sense of urgency, I don't think, from our perspective in making a decision on either one of those buildings. We've got what would amount to almost 2 years to decide. If we're going to move forward with this new building, it's going to be some time before Parks is ready to move out of their building and into a new location, and the same with utility billing folks. So I think there's a lot of time to sort through those ideas. Would SMG like to have that utility billing space? I'm sure they would. They've got a lot of things I think that they would like to use that for. I don't know that we're in a position yet to say that that's the best use for that property. You know, the first task for them would be to convince the city that they are making the best possible use of the space that they already have. Are they using their storage efficiently? Are there other opportunities maybe that make more sense for their operation? But that's certainly one, I think, viable alternative for that particular location. What it would cost, I guess, I mean, that's something that we'd have to vet out through that process. If that's an idea that really bubbles up to the top, then I think that's the time to really get down to brass tacks to figure out what it's going to cost.
And I understand, if I may, Mr. Chair, I understand if, it needs some updates or whatever. My concern is sinking another 5 minutes, and I shouldn't even use magic numbers. We all know it's not usually good. However, we sink X million number of dollars into another facility when we just potentially spend $22 million on another admin building. That's just pause. It makes me pause for many different reasons for concern of spending more money on making those changes. I know I asked a few questions about that too, and I'm this isn't necessarily related. It's all related, I guess, but 500 to 600 walk-ups to the utility billing, is that really 100 per day of people that come to that building? I'm just really surprised by the number of traffic, I guess, that comes to that building, and I don't have a point to make with it, but that just seemed like a really high number of people to go to that building. I'll yield my time for now. I have a few other questions, but I'll wait for now.
If I can just respond briefly, the idea that that building might need a significant investment of dollars to bring it up to some usable purpose for SMG, I think is, I can't imagine what we would do to that building where we would spend any significant amount of money to make it usable. I mean, the building itself, we're told, is worth somewhere around $500,000, so we're not going to invest $1 million into a $500,000 property. That just would not make any sense whatsoever. It's in use today. People are in it today, so it's not like it's dilapidated or falling down or isn't meeting code, that type of thing. So that's not to say it wouldn't need some work to make it usable for their purposes, but again, that's a discussion, I think, for the days to come.
Councilor Buck.
Just to add to the questions about the utility building, I did, for giggles, last night go tour the storage areas at the event center, and Jim David and Dave Bixler went with me. I had been curious because I was leaving a concert one time and just got a peek into one of their storage areas. And here's your trivia for the night. In the concert contracts, those 2,000 chairs that are on the floor, they have 15 minutes by contract to get those chairs off of there because the stage has to be moved out so that they can start tearing it down while they bring the lights down. So that's your trivia for the night. Anyway, there are 13 semi-trailers sitting at the fairgrounds right now full of stuff that belongs to the event center via SMG. The turf is out there. All kinds of things are out there in terms of storage. And so it is a massive amount of space that we're in need of. Whether they use the existing in the building efficiently or not is a great question, and they do all kinds of switching around in odd ways. But just be forewarned that whether we take the utility billing building to be part of the storage issue, we got storage issues out there anyway. And so that's just something to add to this. This is a whole big, it's starting to feel like a big puzzle. And I appreciate everyone asking questions about it, but I think we're going to have to be thinking pretty seriously about what are the long-term effects of building or not building. But let's not be kind of just blowing this off. This needs to be something we seriously talk about. So, thank you.
Councilor Jameson?
Just as a couple of notes there, the storage out at the event center is probably just a little dirty secret that nobody really wants to talk about. They need solutions. Running the event center that we have is not SMG's first rodeo. They understand what they're doing, proven that. But what brings up in all this discussion, what kind of resonates with me is, I think back to the Spellerberg Pool, the event center, this building, the repurposing of all those other buildings. It's when I look through the 5-year CIP, and I see $150,000 for an indoor pool and or architectural design work or something like that, it just doesn't seem like it's as transparent and or well planned out that, did you all know we would be borrowing $22 million this year? Was that in the CIP? I mean, the debt service was projected to, I think, have $1 million of debt service, but it isn't as crystal clear as it really should be and could be. And just like repurposing these buildings that we're talking about, that should be well thought out and planned, a strategy to all that. I mean, it's clear they're going to work on it, and we've got a couple years to figure it out. The intention is to get this building built, just go, get it done. We'll figure out the rest. It just was what's irritating me is that 5-year CIP should just be like a well thought out, rehearsed, executed document that it works well for the future. And this is, it's clear to new counselors as well that it just isn't laid out that way. And the planning that used to go into that was pretty intense, and now it seems to be different. One other statement I gotta say is everybody needs to be understanding that the amount of money we pay in debt service is dollars that we will not spend on other capital projects, i.e., number one, the roads. We will not spend that $1.8 million on roads. When we did the event center, it was the same thing. The $8 or $9 million in debt service was not going to be spent on our roads. We made decisions, the public made decisions to invest that into the event center. And we had a healthy, long discussion about that with the public. This is not happening with this building. It is go now, ask questions later, get it done. I just need everybody to understand that the money we spend on this building is money that we will not be able to spend on roads, bottom line. Certainly there's needs to be addressed, absolutely. I saw it firsthand. I just want everybody to understand exactly what happens. That's all.
Thank you, and I would echo some of those thoughts of, even though it appears, and Councilor Kiley and I have been on a board that or a task force to look at this for 6 months to a year. We as a council need to look at this and take our time, make sure we don't make mistake with taxpayers' money, and so we need to take our time, make sure we get all the information we need, not only from people in the audience, but from our budget analysts and different people like that, and make sure that we do it right the first time and we don't make a mistake as much as possible. Okay, any other comments? I have one. I have a question for Lori Hogstead. Was she, or did she take off? She took off? Lori, if you can hear me, get out here. No, I wanted Lori. Okay, without any other, we have another item. What am I talking about? Yes, that's right, that's right. Tracy again, it's a Tracy Turback bill.
I'm not going to let you off that easy. You know, these year-end final reports only come around once a year, as luck would have it, so I'm not going to let you off that easy. Before I jump into the presentation, I do want to take just a minute to acknowledge the finance team and all the hard work they do all year long in developing the budgets, doing the financial planning, preparing these monthly updates and the monthly reports that you get, those monthly financial updates. That report that's maybe 20 pages long or so is really a very, very extensive report, and I can guarantee you not every city council, very few city councils around the country get a report each month that's that extensive and that informative. So that doesn't come easy. It isn't something that's on autopilot. It does take people to do that every month and to put our financial statements together after the close of the fiscal year and get an audit done in a very timely manner. That's something we take a lot of pride in and certainly put a high priority in. And I've got just an outstanding team that really make all those things happen. So with that said, jumping into the 2015 financial results, our final update for 2015. No surprise, it was another very good year for the City of Sioux Falls. You folks know the local economy is doing very well, and the city finances continue to be in a very, very strong position. I will mention that the internal audit for 2015 is in progress. It's not completed yet, so all this financial information is still subject to final audit, but we think we are in a very, very close spot to where the final numbers will end up. The presentation today, I do want to, as I do with you folks throughout the year and in the monthly updates, review kind of where we ended the year from an economic standpoint here in Sioux Falls. We'll touch on some of the highlights that I think are maybe at the top of your mind in terms of things you want to know or want to understand relative to the financial results for 2015 for our general fund, our capital program, and in our enterprise activities. Also included a couple slides on debt. I know it's something we've done in the past, but I know it's of keen interest because of the discussion that we're having, particularly relative to the office building project. And then we'll just touch very briefly on kind of where we're going or what we see in the future and where our priorities will be. So with that, looking at the economics as we do, we track the local unemployment and the local MSA. The graphic shows you 3 years of history in terms of the Sioux Falls unemployment rate. The red line is the 2015 unemployment rate here locally. You can see we ended the year 2015 at a 2.6% unemployment rate. That's the lowest of the last 3 years. It's gotten progressively lower overall. That's in comparison to the statewide rate, which is also quite low relative to most places around the country. South Dakota unemployment ended the year at 3.1%. The national rate was at 4.8%. In terms of the number of people working in Sioux Falls or working in the MSA, 2015 averaged about 140,600 people. That's an increase of about 3,000 people over the average for the 2014 year. Now, if you look at just where we ended 2014 to where we ended 2015, it's actually a much larger number. It's over 6,000 more people are working in Sioux Falls in December of 15 when compared to December of 14. So, and if for those of you that attended the market outlook last week, that was pretty close to what the number was reported there. It was about 6,000 folks. So again, very, very strong employment picture here locally. Again, no surprise, building permit values. We set another high water mark in 2015 for the dollar value of construction that was permitted. 2015 ended above 2014 by almost $57 million. That's about a 9.2% increase. Again, another high water mark for the City of Sioux Falls. A lot of that was driven by commercial construction. New commercial construction was up more than $164 million last year when compared to 2014. It's about a 190% increase. It's driven mainly by some of the office projects, institutional and educational construction activity that we saw last year. However, additions and remodels in addition to new construction were also up significantly, more than 7% over the prior year. We did see new residential construction fall off compared to 2014. The single family and townhome units actually saw an increase. However, we did see a significant drop in the number of multifamily units. That was down by about 25% compared to 2014, which I think we all probably knew that was coming, that the pace multifamily units were being constructed in 14 was really just a very, very hot rate of construction. Looking at our sales tax numbers, this graphic again shows you kind of over a 3-year time frame how that year-over-year growth was changing from month to month. 2015, we ended the year without the Department of Revenue audit collections factored in with a growth of 5.7%. Our budget targets in 2015, with those audit collections, of course, those dollars that come in from those audit collections help us make our budget. Factoring those in, we saw 5.9% growth. The 2016 budget, the budget for the current year was based on a 7% growth in 15, so we didn't hit that 7% mark last year, about 1% percentage point short, and then it was also based on growth this year of 6%. So what all that means is that we'll need to have about a $4 million increase in revenues for 16 over 15 in order to hit our budget, and that would translate to about a 7% increase this year. So that's what we're looking for to make our budget. The average over the past 3 years growth is about 6.2%. Looking at entertainment taxes, we saw just incredible growth in these sales. Ended the year 2015 at 9.4% growth over 2014, well above the 3-year average. It's been averaging about just under 7% for our entertainment tax dollars. So a lot of discretionary dollars rolling around in the economy in terms of the entertainment, those sales that are subject to entertainment tax collections. Okay, jumping into the financial results then. In this, the next few slides, I'll cover the general fund operating results, and we'll touch on the capital program, as well as I said, the enterprise funds. We maintain 5 enterprise funds, and then take a look at city debt. Within our general fund, of course, this is our primary operating account. The basic municipal services are funded through the general fund. That includes things like public safety provided by our police and fire departments, the operations of our parks and libraries, the street maintenance and snow removal costs, the public health department, and then the kind of the basic general governmental services, the mayor, the council, finance, attorney's office, HR. All those things are funded through the general fund of the city. The major funding sources for our general fund include the first penny sales tax. All of the dollars collected from that first 1% tax go into the general fund, as do the property taxes that the city collects. So those are really the 2 primary funding sources for all of those services I mentioned. And then in addition, there's a whole host. They fall off very quickly after those top 2, but there are other sources of revenue, charges for services. The public health department, as you might expect, collects for services they provide, state and federal grants, motor vehicle fees, a lot of other miscellaneous revenue sources that end up into the general fund and help provide support for those services. Overall, the bottom line year-end results met our forecasted expectations. Some of the highlights that I'd mentioned are on the slide in terms of the revenues. We did see property tax revenues reflecting our growing tax base increased $2.3 million. That's about a 4.5% increase over the 2014 revenues from property taxes. Of course, most of that coming from that growth in the tax base. Sales tax revenues, as I mentioned, were up 5.9% or about $3.2 million. And permitting revenues from all that construction activity were up over $770,000 when compared to 2014. So all that construction activity, well, it certainly puts a burden on our building services team in terms of issuing permits and doing those inspections. It does generate revenues to help support that additional cost as well. On the expenditure side of things, the departments really do an excellent job, and I have to commend them all for the way that they manage their budgets. We do stand side by side with them. We've got an analyst in the finance department that is assigned to each department, so they each have an analyst to rely on. And those folks are getting to know the departments as well and the budgets as well as anyone else in the department. So the analysts that we have really, I think, are bringing a lot of value to the table to help the departments do even better in managing their budgets. But they've done an excellent job in 2015 and allowing us to help them understand the numbers and work the numbers gives them the opportunity to really focus on what they do best, and that's providing law enforcement services or fire protection or street maintenance. So that's kind of the goal, and us as a finance team engaging in the departments so that we can do what we do best, and it frees them up to do what they do best. At the end of the year, 2.7% of the general fund budget remained unspent. So that's on an overall basis across all of our general fund departments. So that's fairly tight budgeting, I would say, less than 3% remaining within the general fund operating budgets. Looking at some numbers then, I know one thing the council is always interested in, something that we spend a lot of time monitoring, forecasting, planning for, is our available fund balance in the general fund. And that's really tells a lot about how strong the city is from a financial perspective and reflects our ability to deal with financial adversities when they do come along, or perhaps take advantage of opportunities that come along. The 2015, we started the year with $46.1 million in available general fund balance. Revenues, we ended the year at $144.1 million. That's slightly under budget, about 0.5%. So we came in very, very close to what had been budgeted. That 0.5% equals about $700,000. Revenues were up in comparison to 14 by more than $6 million, or about 4.4%. Expenditures in the general fund came in with a total of $146.8 million. That again is 2.7% under budget. That translates to about $4.1 million that was left in the general fund budget at the end of the year. And I should point out that does not include that provisional supplement that you folks approved late last year for snow removal. So that never made its way into the budget because it wasn't needed. So that $4.1 million that remained did not include any of those dollars. The restricted fund balance, we saw a minor adjustment there, a change in restricted of about $200,000. So those numbers all net out to a change in our general fund available fund balance of about $2.5 million. So that means we used, for the first time in several years, used part of our general fund balance to pay for services. And that is certainly does not come as any surprise. It has been forecast for some time that we would do that, and it really coincides, for the most part, with the opening of fire station, the new fire station that we opened in 2015, and the additional operational expenses that come along with that. So we've been, in effect, building some of our fund balance up to allow us to feather those costs in over time, and this is part of that process. In addition to the fire station, we also undertook some significant repair and maintenance projects. The City Hall remodeling that Sue talked about that took place, major tuck pointing projects, not only in City Hall, but the fire station across the street from City Hall or up the street from City Hall. Those are some major kind of one-time repair and maintenance projects that were undertaken, and those, of course, those dollars then fall back out of the budget once the project is done. So we ended the year with available fund balance of $43.6 million on a percentage basis, and that's I know a number that you folks monitor. That translates to 28.9% of our final 2015 general fund budget. In the original, just to give you an idea of some of the forecasting that we do, and I know we share that with you folks when we present a budget at the beginning of the year. We update that then in the fall to kind of follow through on where we expect the fiscal year to end. The original 2015 budget as adopted, we had projected ending 2015 with a reserve of 28.4%. As you can see, we ended at 28.9%. So we missed it by a whopping 0.5%. So we feel pretty good about that, given that the original 2015 budget, of course, that was a number or a process that took place in the summer of 2014. So a good year and a half before the end of the fiscal year. That's what a good job our team did in forecasting that. Last summer, when we prepared the 2016 budget, then of course we updated that forecast. When the budget was under consideration at that time, we had projected ending 2015 with a reserve of 28.8%. So we got even closer, which makes sense. I guess the closer we get to that end of the year, we should be getting more accurate in making those projections. But last summer, last summer when you were considering the current 16 budget, we were forecasting 28.8% reserve. So we came in pretty much spot on with that. Taking another look, kind of a recap of those use of general fund reserves. As I mentioned, that's the first time in a number of years that we've utilized reserves. To put it in a little bit of perspective, the original budget adopted for 2015 called for utilizing $5.3 million. That's a budget balancing tool that we use. Throughout the year, we made some budget amendments. You folks approved some supplements that brought that budgeted use of fund balance up to $6 million. Last fall, when we made our most recent forecast of how much fund balance would be used, we told you it would be about $3 million. And then, as I just told you a minute ago, in actuality, when the books are closed on 2015, we will have used about $2.5 million. So I think that gives you an idea of one, how conservatively we do budget. We don't use near what we typically plan to use in terms of the budgeting process. From a historical perspective, you can see across the bottom, the past 5 years, we have added to our reserves. 2010, it was about $600,000, and it's jumped around a little bit, never an awful lot, but adding to reserves each year for the past 5 years, about $5 million. And then this year utilizing about $2.5 million. So I think that's a good, responsible utilization of the resources that we have available. Again, when we open a fire station, take on major R&M projects, those kinds of things, we should expect to utilize a portion of our reserves. Looking at, from a historical perspective, just how that 28.9% compares. This shows a 10-year historical year-end available fund balance from 2006 through 2015. The yellow horizontal line there is that 25% policy target. Our goal is to not end the year below that. You can see we very consistently have ended the year above it, some years significantly above that. Again, the 2015 decrease has been forecast for a number of years in relation to fire station number 11 opening, and the 28.9% for 15 certainly keeps us solidly above that 25% policy target. I will say, as we talked about last summer, last fall, when you folks adopted the 2016 budget, we do anticipate that 2016 will also see a modest drawdown in the general fund reserves by year end. So we are anticipating to kind of continue to feather in the cost of those projects. We also have some additional significant projects, as you know, that are one-time things that are funded from the general fund. The Cayley Library project, for example, is undergoing some remodeling this year. That type of a project is funded through our general fund. But again, those are kind of one and done costs that aren't recurring, become part of our base budget then. So we do take those things into account when we're developing those forward-looking forecasts and predict for you folks at budget time where we will end in future years. So this year in 2016, as I say, we do anticipate we will draw reserves down, again, relatively modestly, but we will certainly expect to end the year above that 25% policy target. Looking now briefly at our capital program, it was a very aggressive year again for capital projects. I won't read the list here. You can see for yourself some of the major capital improvements that were completed in 2015. Certainly one of the bigger ones, the purchase of the downtown rail yard, finally came to fruition. A lot of investment in our street system in terms of overlaying and rehabilitating our street infrastructure and some other specific projects that are listed there. In all told, 92 projects were completed in 2015, and with a total investment of completed projects as well as projects that are in process at the end of the year of $99.5 million. So we're investing a lot of money in our infrastructure here, and that's across all types of infrastructure, whether it's our street system, water, wastewater, any of our facilities. $99.5 million in 1 year is certainly a major investment. We did end the year in our capital program in our second penny sales tax fund with $1.3 million of available fund balance. I do expect that in the very near future we'll be back in front of you folks talking about how best to utilize those dollars, and we will certainly come with some recommendations on how to use that $1.3 million remaining. Looking now briefly at our enterprise, our utility funds. Again, we maintain 5 enterprises: our electric, light utility, parking, landfill, water, and water rec, or the sanitary sewer services. So you can see here that all 5 of our enterprises threw off positive cash flows from operation in 2015, and that's important to have positive cash flows from operations so that those enterprises, those utilities can then pay for capital investments, reinvesting that operational cash flow back into the system, improving infrastructure, paying down debt for those utilities. So you can see we're reinvesting a significant amount of that positive cash flow from operations back into those systems. 3 of the 5 enterprise funds are now completely debt-free. The light, the parking, and the landfill enterprises have no outstanding debt on them. And of course, as you folks know, certainly as you see in your monthly reports each month, the water and water rec do have some outstanding bonds and SRF loans. The enterprise rate models are in the process of being updated. You might recall a couple years ago we went to a rolling 2-year rate model plan, so those are up for another look this year. So later this spring you'll be seeing those come before the council in terms of the rate setting for the coming years. Looking at the city debt then, I've got 2 slides here. One is showing the total outstanding debt for the city. This is on a comprehensive basis, so this would tie in to the bottom line on that page of your monthly report where you see the total amount of outstanding debt for the city each month. You can see on the graphic that we ended 2015 with a total of $337 million in outstanding debt. The graphic then, of course, shows you the prior year, so you can get a feel for how that changed during 2015. And then looking forward based on the plans that are in place and the projects that are being proposed, and how we expect that total outstanding balance of debt to change over the next 5 years. So as I mentioned, in 2015, we ended the year with about $337 million. That's down $25 million from the $362 million outstanding at the end of 14. The 2012 was kind of the high water mark. That was the year we sold the bonds for the event center. We ended 2012, it doesn't show up on the graphic here, but at just under $400 million. So we're down more than $60 million from that high water mark just 3 years ago. Of that $337 million, it's fairly close to half and half. There's about 45% of that. As we talked a few weeks ago when I was here with a debt presentation, 45% of that is utility debt, and about 55% of it is tax-supported debt, primarily our second penny sales tax. You can see that we're expecting the amount of outstanding debt overall to increase in 2016. That's an increase of about $44 million. That includes the proposed office building that we've been talking about, a number of water reclamation projects that are in the plan, and we've also been talking about the parking ramp project that will be coming up to you folks, I expect, later this year, as well as some storm drainage improvements that we're expecting to finance with some state revolving loan fund dollars. After 2016, you can see we're expecting that outstanding debt to drop back again. In fact, within just 3 years, we would be back down to the level that we are at the end of 2015. So we do borrow money when we need to, but we have a real strong preference to pay it off at a pretty good clip. And that's, I know the folks from PFM that are here just kind of chuckle when they talk about us relative to some of their other clients in other parts of the country where a lot of other cities are looking to stretch out their debt, pay it off as slowly as they can so they can afford more debt. As you know, you stretch out a 15-year mortgage to 30 years, your payments go down. Well, we don't like to do that here. We do like to pay our debts off quickly, and I think this graphic certainly reflects that on an overall basis. Now, the office building project, of course, that we're talking about, we're talking about using the second penny sales tax revenues for that project. So I thought it'd be important to include that here on this presentation so you can get a feel for where we expect the amount of debt that is being repaid with our second penny. I showed you a graphic last week, kind of a 25-year look forward of how much of our second penny revenues might be used for debt service costs, but this would give you an idea of how much is actually outstanding or we would expect to be outstanding over the next few years. So this is the same time frame as the previous slide. However, it does only include those bonds that are being repaid with second penny sales tax dollars. You can see at the end of 2015, we had about $180 million of outstanding bonds that we are paying on with our second penny sales tax. You can see it's down about $10 million, $11 million from a year ago. And it's down more than $27 million. As I said, the high water mark was in 2012 with the event center bonds, again, which are being repaid with the second penny revenue. So it's down $27 million in just that 3-year period of time. As we've been talking about, we do expect that to go up in 2016 because of the proposed office building project. You can see we're expecting it to go from $180 million up to $190 million. So that reflects the net effect of the additional borrowing less the principal that will be paid off during 2016. Again, after that jump up to $190 million in 16, we see it drop back to where we are at the end of 15 within just 1 year following that. So again, very, very manageable debt service demands on our second penny sales tax dollars. And you can see going forward for the next 5 years how far down that overall balance gets paid down to $149 million by 2020. So that's it for the financial piece of the presentation. Now just a quick look ahead. you folks are familiar with what's in the 2016 budget. We'll continue to work those same priorities that you've appropriated dollars for. Public safety, continue to strengthen our city team. Rebuild, repair, replace is going to continue to be the mantra in so many ways. And investing in quality of life. We'll see completion of the Midco Aquatic Center this year, among other parks improvements and other quality of life elements. We just can't afford to get behind a growing community like we are, and I think it was Councilor Kiley that mentioned last week that in the last 15 years, Sioux Falls has grown the equivalent of Aberdeen and Watertown combined. And if the population numbers don't translate very well, think about the infrastructure and the operational costs that those cities have, and we've added that in 15 years. And so we really have to work hard to stay ahead of that, plan for the future, so that we can continue to maintain or meet the expectations that the public has for the quality of our facilities, the quality of our services that we take so much pride in providing. And of course, maintaining the financial strength of the city is always an underpinning, kind of the linchpin that supports our budget and all of our financial planning. So with that, that concludes my slides. I'd be very happy to take any questions you folks have.
Thank you again for this report. We always enjoy getting it, whether you believe it or not, we do. And it's important for us to stay on top of this, and so that's why we asked for it. So thank you. Questions, Councilor Karski?
Thank you, Council Chair. Tracy, way back in the beginning of your presentation, you talked about sales tax collections. For 2015, we were going to be hoping for 6. We got 5.7, I think you had said.
Yeah, and again, we track two different numbers when it comes to sales tax, with and without those audit collections. Yeah. When we receive a payment from the State Department of Revenue that represents dollars that they've collected as a result of an audit, we don't know what years those apply to. And so when we're tracking our growth to try to determine what the current economic levels are, what the activity in the economy is, we prefer not to use those collections. But certainly there are dollars that come in from those audits that help us meet our budget, and they represent real revenue to the city. So 5.9% was the real revenue growth to the city, but 5.7% of that was represented by the current sales tax collections and not including audits.
How far behind? You had said for 2016 we need to be at 7% to make our budget, and this year we're at 5.9. We didn't make 6. If we again make 6 or 5.9, I mean that's constantly falling further and further behind. When do we make that adjustment?
Well, it's not cumulative. I mean, in order to hit our budget this year, we got to grow 7% over what we actually collected in 15. And so that 1% differential, I think, that you're getting at represents about $600,000. So that's, less than 0.5% of our total budget. So it shouldn't be alarming. I mean, it's certainly going to take a good year for us to hit our budget number this year, no question. 7% is very solid, very, very healthy growth.
And that's the number I was looking for. What dollar does that tie to? 600,000, you said? Okay.
Yep. Each 1% of our sales tax, first penny, generates about $600,000. And you can see it's certainly not out of the realm of possibilities. We ended 2013 at 8% growth. So it's kind of been a little bit of a wavy thing, hovering right around that 6% growth over the last few years.
Councilor Erpenbach.
So what you're saying is shop local?
Absolutely.
Okay. My question then is about, under your capital program, the next slide, the 2015 investments, would you look at that very bottom number, the 1.3 million remaining in the available balance for the CIP? Can you talk about that? What is there a plan for that? Maybe I'm forgetting conversations from a while ago, or is it just sitting there waiting for us to do something with it?
Every year, once the books are closed on the previous fiscal year, at least in my time here, we've always had some money left over in our capital program. And that comes from a variety of things. Some years it's because our sales tax revenues exceeded what we estimated. There are always some projects that finish under budget that those dollars then get returned to that fund balance. Last year, you'll recall, a good share of that, what's often called surplus from our capital program, was appropriated by supplement for the aquatic center project. And so these are dollars, this 1.3 million are dollars that are available in our capital fund. They're not obligated to any other projects at this time, but typically that's a process then that we go through in the spring to identify how should we best make use of those dollars, and then you folks ordinarily would appropriate those dollars to make use of them this year yet, rather than just letting them ride or be budgeted into the 2017 budget. My expectation is, is that we will provide you with some recommendations here in the very near future as to how that 1.3 million would best be utilized, and then that'll start the discussion on how ultimately they do get used.
Great, thank you. Shop local.
Shop local, right. Any other questions?
Yes.
Counselor Erickson? Yes,
Thank you.
need to hold your hand up. I can't hear and I can't see, so. Just
That's okay. Couple questions on building permit valuations. Fantastic growth. I mean, that's something we should always be celebrating when we have a growth year like that. My question is, of the 676.3, how much of that number do not go on our property tax rolls?
Yeah, I don't know that, but I'm sure we could get that from our building services department. So you're talking about like a school building, for example,
right,
would be included in that, but doesn't directly impact our tax base from a property tax.
Just email it to me if you don't mind. And then my other question that I think I know the answer to, but I guess I just want to hear a little bit more information. We're talking, I've heard you say 6% a lot, that our growth rate is 6%. Talk to me about how we come up with that 6%. Is that finance? Is that council? Where do we get the 6% growth rate, and how is that forecasted and determined?
I'm not sure I know.
Sales tax collections. Like,
Right.
I mean, I don't know if that's predetermined that we think that we're going to grow 6% over last year.
When we adopt a budget, we have to make an estimate of what that sales tax will generate in terms of revenue. And the best information we have is historically what has the growth been from year to year. And we'll look very closely at, this spring before we present you with a budget, or this summer when we present you with a budget, we'll look particularly at the last 6 to 12 months, just what has the experience been, what is the most recent, most relevant information that we have, and then we'll present a budget that reflects that growth rate.
Okay, so then
Historically, excuse me, if I can just finish my thought. Historically, and I think last week I showed you a 25-year historical growth chart for the second penny revenue, which is really, with very minor exception, it would be identical for the first penny. But for the last 25 years, it's grown at on a average annual 6% growth rate. So it's been pretty steady.
Okay. And then if I can ask, just kind of piggybacking off of that, since we are talking about having to meet that 7% growth rate this year, and it is the extra 600,000, is that something that will be taken into consideration in our budget? Then we still are over that 25% threshold. However, we're dipping down. We have a new fire station that needs to go in 2018, so that's going to use a substantial amount of money as well. So when that budget's planned, I mean, is that something that you will, instead of taking 6%, you'll say, well, let's do 5% because we're a little bit under?
Right. We rethink and reevaluate those numbers, before we present you with a budget. And we don't look at just sales tax revenues either. We look at, the sales taxes will generate, I say, somewhere around around $60 million for the general fund. Well, the general fund budget this year is about $170 million. So it's a very important, a very significant part of the revenue, but it's not the only revenue source for our general fund. So we have to look at the whole thing as a whole in terms of, we saw significant overrun in terms of the revenues generated from permitting activities. That helps to offset a shortfall we might experience somewhere else. So, yeah, I mean, we absolutely reevaluate that. It's just not an automatic percentage that we plug in every year. Although historically it's been very, very consistent, as I say, at 6%. We have utilized other growth rate to base the budget on in the past.
I just find it fascinating, just my time in the legislature, that our growth rate in peer was always 3%. So when it's 6%, I kind of, ooh, I mean, that's double. It's a pretty aggressive growth rate. Just makes me a little uncomfortable comparing it to our growth rate in peer. And I know that's not comparing apples to apples, but that's just my experience of where I came from. So that's why I asked those questions behind that.
Well, and I think it's, I mean, you raise a very good point, because that tells you how significant and how important the Sioux Falls economy is to the overall state economy, because it's almost 25% of all sales tax revenues for the state of South Dakota are generated here in Sioux Falls.
Right.
So you can imagine if Sioux Falls is growing at 6%, if we were only growing at 3%, where would the state be in terms of
what
their
number
revenue
would they be
growth?
at? Right.
I mean, they would be in a pretty dire situation. So when Sioux Falls does well, the state of South Dakota does well.
Thank you.
Seeing no other, I'm sorry, yes, there was, Greg. Councilor Jameson.
Thank you. Tracy, you brought up the enterprise fund debt, and the other debt that's obligated by the second penny is kind of a 50-50 ratio. We're somewhat close to that. Historically, has that always been the picture? Do you know?
I guess I can't answer that off the top of my head, just how that's changed. Typically, because the debt is taken out in either case for major capital projects. We're not borrowing money to pay salaries or that kind of thing. So it will ebb and flow over time. We aren't likely to take out financing for another Lewis and Clark project, for example, anytime real soon. So the water debt very likely will taper down as we pay that bond off. But what we've seen in water rec in recent years, for reasons I think that were very obvious a few years ago when we had major sewer collapse, our system needed a lot of capital investment. And so we are taking on more debt in our water rec program to make those investments so that the community can rely on a solid sanitary sewer system, position us so we can accommodate growth and continue to grow and develop. So you see those things over a long period of time, ebb and flow. We will go years without borrowing, and then, as projects need to be done, then the borrowing hits and you start to pay it off, so you're ready for the next one.
Right, I think that's interesting. The point for me over the years has always been the enterprise funds always seem like something that we just need to have done. I mean, who's going to argue with replacing a sewer system for those reasons you just stated? But the other portion, though, has always been up for discussion about whether we should or shouldn't be doing those particular items. And that's why it was interesting, that history of that 50-50 kind of ratio, whether we get out of, if we ever do, or we've gotten out of sequence. But it does bring back the point of the borrowing for the second penny obligated borrowing. In the presentation earlier about eliminating that kind of a spike over the next few years, if we do borrow the $20 million or so, you must have been a part of that discussion of determining, well, that debt service, if we included it at the regular rate, would be too high. Or can you just tell us a little bit more about your reasoning and justifications for that leveling off? From your words. I know Jessica mentioned it, and she wasn't giggling back there. I looked at her. She wasn't giggling about how much detail we get, but if you could, in your words.
Sure. The intention there primarily has to do with the dollars that have been allocated in our capital program for other projects. We'd like to be able to do this financing and begin to make our payments in 2017 without disrupting any projects that are planned to be done in the next 2 to 3 years. And so when the council adopted the current capital program last fall, when you approved it, that allowed for $1 million a year for debt service payments in 17, 18, 19, and 20. And so we looked at that, and the charge we gave PFM was show us something that will fit within that $1 million for the first couple of years. And then, I mean, the further out in a plan you go, the squishier plans really are. And maybe some projects are going to move back, maybe some will move forward. There's a lot more change typically in those outer years, whereas your plan next year is a little firmer than the year after, and that year's firmer than still, than the year beyond it. So we wanted to keep our adopted plan to the extent that was reasonable in place without disrupting it, and that was really the driving factor there.
I get in there as well, if I could, just the one last question is the total outstanding debt chart that you showed for sales tax only, clearly doesn't represent any forecasted or foreseen debt service other than what you've described in the admin building. But what's interesting, or would be interesting to me, is the previous year's debt service, new debt that we've taken out every year. So that we, for instance, if on average we borrow $30 million, or whatever that number is, maybe like you say 31 year nothing or whatever, little the next year, that would be an interesting number to see how it kind of has rolled out over the years in an effort to forecast it like you've done, paying down the debt service. But I think what's fair and reasonable is to consider that more borrowing will occur. And if you could somehow show us that history, I suppose I could figure it out too looking back, but I think that's missing from your chart is just projected average per year debt borrowing. Could be something beneficial to us to see that it isn't just going to go down, there'll be more.
There will be other projects, although certainly within the 5-year plan, everything that's in the plan is reflected here. We don't borrow money every year. 2012 would have been the most recent time, and that's fairly typical. And as Jessica mentioned, we may borrow on a regular basis, but it's not on an annual basis. Right. Certainly there will be other projects that come down the road that we want to get done while we can. Certainly one advantage of that is locking in construction costs. We don't have to deal or worry about construction inflation as we maybe set money aside. Would be another approach to funding capital programs, set money aside until we have the cash saved up. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that as low as interest rates are today, the construction inflation is going to eat up every bit as much as those interest dollars would over the next 20 years. If we can lock in rates now, for example, on this building, rather than waiting 20 years to build a building, we will certainly be dollars ahead relative to how much construction costs will increase in 20 years.
One more.
Just as a point of clarification on that same topic, our enterprise funds show that in the light division we've got 3.6 million saved, parking 3.4, landfill 10.1, water 21.6. Are you telling me that those are out of order? That we shouldn't be saving that money because it doesn't make sense for us to stockpile cash for future capital projects?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I think in the case of our utility funds, it's certainly, we've taken a balanced approach. A lot of the capital investments we are making with cash. There are times when, this year is a good example. We have some major water reclamation projects where it would have totally disrupted every other project that they have in their plan to fund a $26 million project with cash, even if they had it. They don't have that much cash. But so when we can go to the state and borrow money at 2%, it certainly makes good sense to fund some of those larger projects that way. It's really about maintaining balance within our plan and not get too heavily weighted, either paying cash for everything or utilizing debt for everything. And I think that's a prudent approach to maintain a good balance. And you really have to look at each one of those enterprises differently because they are different, behave differently.
Councilor Jamison, you may ask another question if you'd like. Okay. Councilor Erpenbach, you're thinking.
after we're done with this. I've
Okay.
asked enough questions, thank you, but I do have something to say.
Thank you very much, Tracy, for this great report. You know, this is gonna, we'll keep going this because, well, we've got some big decisions to make in the next couple of, or month or so. And we need all of this that we can get so that we make that good decision. Appreciate it very much. And thank you to the our visitors today, Bruce and Jessica. I was close. Thank you. And thank you very much for being here to help. So
We'll be back at 7.
Councilor Kiley, you had a comment?
Yes. Earlier, I congratulated Augustana University men's and women, and I omitted to congratulate the University of Sioux Falls women for advancing to tonight's championship game against the Augustana University women. So good luck to both teams, and it was an unintended slight, Councilor Staggers, so just wanted to be sure that I mentioned that. Thank you.
Pretty sure it was intentional.
Councilor Urbanbach.
Also an unrelated topic. Constituents are concerned, and it has been in the media, that the paratransit bus rate, the 50 cents isn't covered under the existing tickets. So if you have $2 tickets in your possession and you're going to need 50 cents more for each of those tickets, I just wanted to clarify. I know that I've seen some conversations about that paratransit will honor those $2 tickets for the next 60 days. Is that correct? For the next 2 months? Do you recall? I just wanted to be able to say that out loud, and I don't see staff here, and I'm sorry. I just pulled this out of my hat. But it is important for people to understand that paratransit will honor the $2 tickets for at least the next several weeks. So that's important. Thank you.
Okay. I believe that's it. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. This meeting is adjourned.